The morning began like every other, quiet, functional, and hollow. Ava placed a cup of coffee in front of Ryan, steam rising in the space between them. He didn't look up from his phone. His thumb moved across the screen, face dimly lit by the cold blue light. She wanted to say something about the meeting last night, the dinner she had waited to share, but the words collapsed somewhere inside her. It wasn't anger she felt anymore, it was the slow ache of being unnecessary. He took a sip, nodded absently, and stood. Another day, another silent departure, the sound of the door closing had become the rhythm of her mornings. She stared at the untouched second cup of coffee, hers, and wondered when warmth had turned into habit. She washed the dishes carefully, as if precision could fill the quiet. The walls didn't echo, they absorbed. By noon she had scrolled through messages, watched the same show twice, and realized she hadn't spoken a single word since Ryan left. Silence, she thought, had a way of making you forget your own tone. It was late afternoon when Daniel dropped by. He carried a folder, smiled politely, and asked if Ryan was home. Ava shook her head, almost apologetically, though she didn't owe anyone an apology for her husband's absence. Daniel said he could leave the papers, but she offered coffee instead. It was automatic, polite, yet a small part of her wanted him to stay, to fill the space with something living. He agreed, taking the seat across from her that Ryan rarely used anymore. Their conversation began with work, moved to travel, then to weather, unimportant words that somehow mattered because they existed at all. He asked about her writing, something she hadn't mentioned in months. She blinked, surprised he remembered. She told him she used to write stories but stopped when life got too predictable. He said predictability was what kills imagination, not time. She laughed, not because it was funny but because it had been a while since anyone said something that reached her. When he left, the air felt altered. She noticed the imprint of the mug on the table, the faint scent of his cologne that lingered after the door closed. It was nothing, she told herself. A conversation, a courtesy. But she caught herself thinking of how he listened, how he looked at her not as someone's wife but as a person who still existed. That realization scared her more than it pleased her. Evening returned with Ryan's voice echoing through a phone call before he walked through the door. He spoke of deadlines, meetings, tired partners. He didn't notice the coffee she reheated for him, the small effort she made to appear involved. She nodded at the right times, smiled where it was expected. He never looked up long enough to notice her eyes didn't match her mouth. When he went to shower, she scrolled through old messages on her phone, pausing on one from Daniel, weeks old, a casual, "Hope you're both doing well." She almost replied, then stopped, days folded into each other. Ryan's late nights became normal, his voice a background hum she learned to live without. Sometimes Daniel came by with paperwork or updates. He never stayed long, but those brief visits punctured the monotony. He asked about her garden, her favorite books, her family. Simple things, yet his attention made her feel briefly real. She started anticipating his knocks more than Ryan's key turning in the lock. That truth sank deep, quietly dangerous. One afternoon, Ryan called to say he'd be traveling for 2 days. She said okay, too calmly. The house was too large for one person, too silent for thought. She cleaned, cooked, tried reading, then stopped midway through every task. Her mind wandered, uninvited, to Daniel's voice. She remembered his tone, steady, warm, free of distraction. She wondered if loneliness had a sound. If so, it might be her own breathing in the dark. The next morning, she received a message, Daniel asking if he could drop some documents. Her heart reacted before her mind did. She typed back, "Sure, anytime." The words looked harmless on the screen, but she reread them 3 times before sending. When he arrived, she noticed how natural it felt, how conversation flowed without effort. They spoke of everything except the thing pulsing quietly between them. He left sooner than she wanted, and she watched the door long after he was gone, as if waiting for the air to settle back to its usual stillness. That night, she dreamed of voices, Ryan's distant, Daniel's near. She woke with a start, realizing her heart had chosen proximity over promise. She pressed her palms to her face, ashamed of thoughts she hadn't even spoken aloud. The mind could betray long before the body ever did. When Ryan returned, he kissed her forehead distractedly, the same way he always did, and handed her a souvenir mug from the airport. She thanked him, smiled, placed it on the shelf, and noticed how it looked perfectly aligned with all the others, untouched, decorative, lifeless. By the end of the week, she no longer waited for Ryan to call. Instead, she waited for silence, the moment her phone might light up with a message that wasn't business or routine. She hated herself for hoping. But hope, once born, doesn't listen to logic. It grows quietly in the cracks where love used to live. She told herself she wasn't crossing any lines. She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet every time Daniel's name appeared on her screen, she felt the faint tremor of something dangerous awakening. And every time Ryan spoke from another room, his words sounded like they were meant for someone else entirely. In the stillness before sleep, she realized she had become invisible in her own life, seen only in the reflection of someone else's eyes. She didn't want more. She wanted to feel again, to exist in the space between absence and attention. And without knowing when it began, she found herself waiting for the next time Daniel would look at her the way her husband once did, before everything turned quiet. That thought, small and unspoken, was where it all truly started. The next few days unfolded in careful rhythm, each one balanced between what should be said and what must be left unsaid. Ava tried to resume normality, telling herself that Daniel was just a friend of her husband, that politeness was not a crime. Yet when his name appeared in her messages, her heartbeat betrayed her. The text was short, practical, asking if she could sign a document Ryan had forgotten. She agreed before she thought it through. By the time the bell rang, she already knew she was waiting for something beyond a signature. Daniel entered with the same quiet courtesy, always aware of boundaries, yet something had shifted. They both felt it, the thin line between comfort and something else. He commented on the smell of fresh coffee. She said she'd made too much. He offered to take a cup, and she poured without a word. The silence between sentences carried a pulse neither could ignore. They talked about the weather again, about how the season was changing, about how people did too. She noticed the way he listened, fully, attentively, like her words had weight. She hadn't realized how starved she'd been for attention until she received it. Ryan's voice the night before had been distant through the phone, rushed, tired. Daniel's voice in person was calm, deliberate, grounding. He asked how she was really doing, and she found herself answering honestly for the first time in months. She spoke of small disappointments, of the house that no longer felt like home, of how silence could be louder than noise. Daniel didn't interrupt or offer empty sympathy. He simply nodded, his expression thoughtful, understanding. When he left that afternoon, Ava didn't tell Ryan he had come. She didn't even understand why she kept it to herself, maybe because explaining it would require her to admit something she didn't yet want to name. The next morning, she found herself replaying fragments of conversation, the tone of his voice, the pauses that felt longer than necessary. She wanted to dismiss it, to erase it from her mind, but instead she found comfort in remembering that a few evenings later, Ryan canceled dinner again. She ate alone, then wandered outside where the evening breeze was soft and cool. The sky looked endless but strangely heavy. She didn't notice when she dialed Daniel's number, or why she did it. When he answered, she almost hung up. She said she just wanted to confirm that Ryan received the project files. He said yes, but stayed on the line a moment longer than needed. They talked about nothing for 10 minutes, but the ease between them said everything. After that call, she couldn't sleep. Guilt sat quietly beside her, not accusing, just existing. She told herself she hadn't done anything wrong. Words couldn't betray, could they? Yet her thoughts betrayed her every time they returned to his voice. The next day, Daniel texted to say he was nearby, asking if she needed anything from the store. It was such a simple gesture, but she read it 3 times before replying no. Still, the gesture stayed with her all day, a small spark against a long winter. When they met again, it was unplanned. He stopped by with Ryan's forgotten notebook, and she opened the door before he even knocked twice. The conversation flowed easily. They stood too close, not by intention but by gravity. He handed her the notebook, his fingers brushing hers. Neither moved back. The air between them thickened, not uncomfortable, just heavy with the awareness of what they were refusing to acknowledge. Ava spoke first, her voice unsteady. She said she didn't know why it felt so easy to talk to him. Daniel didn't answer right away. He said maybe it was because no one else was really listening. The honesty of it stung. For a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Words had already done enough damage. Rain began outside, soft at first, then steady. Daniel glanced toward the door but didn't leave. Ava stood still, caught between what was right and what was real. He finally said he should go, and she nodded, though she didn't move either. The silence filled every corner of the room, louder than thunder. For a second that stretched too long, they were simply two people standing on opposite sides of a line that no longer existed. He stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. Her heart raced, but her body didn't move. He looked at her, not searching, not demanding, just seeing her in a way that stripped away the months of invisibility she had carried. That look alone was more dangerous than touch. He whispered her name, then stopped, his restraint holding back something stronger than desire, something like recognition. She turned away first, forcing air into her lungs. The spell broke, but its echo lingered. When he left, she locked the door quickly, as if to trap the moment inside. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, flushed, alive, afraid. She pressed her palms against it, whispering to herself that it was nothing, that it could still be undone. But she knew it couldn't. There was no undoing what had already been felt. That night, Ryan called from his office. He spoke about deadlines and fatigue, his voice the same rhythm she'd heard for years. She responded softly, pretending to listen, pretending not to hear the storm still roaring inside her. Every word felt rehearsed, every silence loaded. When the call ended, she sat in the dark, letting the quiet surround her again. Only this time, it wasn't empty, it was filled with everything unspoken, everything forbidden. Ava knew she had reached a point where nothing outward had changed, yet everything within her had shifted. She hadn't crossed any visible line, but the ground beneath her had already moved. The next step, she feared, would not be a choice but an inevitability. And even as she promised herself she'd pull away, a quiet truth surfaced in her mind, that she didn't want to. The following week began with avoidance disguised as routine. Ava woke early, made breakfast, moved through the house like someone performing a life she no longer inhabited. Ryan left with his usual distracted kiss, his voice muffled by phone calls. She told herself the storm had passed, that what happened with Daniel was only a passing weakness. But denial has a way of echoing louder each time it's repeated. She cleaned, cooked, and pretended not to wait for something that wouldn't come. Yet she checked her phone more than usual, convincing herself it was for emails. Days turned into a blur of silence until a message appeared late one night. "I shouldn't have stayed that long the other day." The words were simple, restrained, but they carried the weight of everything they hadn't said. Ava typed several replies and deleted them all. Finally, she sent only one word, "I know." It should have ended there. It didn't. The next evening, Ryan mentioned Daniel during dinner. He praised his reliability, said they made a good team. The sound of Daniel's name in his mouth twisted something inside her. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Ryan's phone buzzed. He excused himself to take the call. Ava watched him leave, the familiar sight of his back disappearing down the hall. In that quiet moment, she realized how far she had drifted from the life they'd built together. Not by distance, but by silence. When Daniel came by a few days later, it wasn't planned. Ryan had asked him to drop off a contract. Ava hesitated before opening the door, hoping she could manage politeness without emotion. But as soon as she saw him, the fragile balance she'd built crumbled. They spoke little. His voice was lower, his tone cautious, as if every word might trigger something neither wanted to face. She thanked him for bringing the file. He said it was no trouble. Then there was only silence, the kind that pulls two people closer because neither can find a reason to step back. He said he'd been trying not to think about that night. She said she'd been failing at the same thing. The admission hung between them, raw and unpolished. He took a step closer, and this time she didn't retreat. There were no promises, no explanations, only the faint tremor of restraint collapsing. He reached for her, and for one brief, irreversible moment, everything they had resisted gave way. It wasn't passion that moved them, it was exhaustion. The exhaustion of pretending, of staying loyal to emptiness, of living untouched. The world outside stayed indifferent. The room was quiet except for the sound of breath, heavy and uneven. There was no romance in it, only surrender. The moment ended as quickly as it began, leaving behind a silence thicker than before. She pulled away first, not out of shame but disbelief. He didn't speak. Neither did she. When Daniel finally left, Ava stood by the window long after his car disappeared. Her reflection looked like a stranger's, a woman who had crossed a line she swore she never would. The weight of what she'd done pressed down slowly, not as panic, but as understanding. She hadn't been swept away, she had walked into it willingly, step by step, through every ignored hesitation. Ryan came home late that night. He talked about deadlines, about how Daniel had helped finalize an important deal. She listened, her heart splitting at the sound of the same name that now carried two lives, one known, one hidden. He asked if she was all right. She said she was tired. That was true, though not in the way he thought. Sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, staring into the dark, replaying the moment in fragments, the sound of Daniel's voice, the look in his eyes before everything fell apart. There was no thrill left, only clarity. She realized it wasn't love or desire that had drawn her to him. It was the hunger to be seen, to matter to someone again. But being seen came at a cost, and now she carried it alone. In the morning, she made breakfast as usual. Ryan joined her, distracted but cheerful. He didn't notice her trembling hands, didn't notice how she kept her eyes down. When he reached for her hand across the table, she froze, not from fear, but from the cruel irony that now, when he finally touched her, she felt nothing. The distance had become permanent. Daniel didn't come by again. There was no message, no explanation, only absence. Ava didn't seek him out. She didn't need to. What happened between them existed outside time, brief, irreversible, wordless. It didn't need revisiting, it only needed to be lived with. Days passed, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Ryan's world continued unchanged. Ava's world, though identical on the surface, had cracked beneath the weight of what she knew. She moved through each day with a calm precision that bordered on numbness. Sometimes she caught herself waiting for guilt to fade, but it didn't. It simply transformed into something quieter, something that lived beneath her skin. One evening, Ryan spoke about their future, about moving to another city, a new start. She smiled and agreed. But in her mind, she knew a new place couldn't change what had already shifted inside her. Once control is lost, it doesn't return, it only hides behind habit. Later that night, as she stood by the window watching the city lights flicker, she whispered to herself, "It wasn't him who lost control. It was me, the moment I stopped pretending I hadn't already." The thought came with no tears, no regret, only acceptance. She turned off the light, walked to bed, and lay beside the man who would never know that the quietest part of her life had been the one that changed everything. Nothing looked different, but nothing was the same. The peak moment had come and gone, leaving behind not destruction, but the haunting calm of understanding, how easily a heart can slip when it's been empty too long, and how sometimes losing control isn't an accident at all, but the only way left to feel alive.